Ugh, can you move any slower? Dylan scoffed as he nearly tripped over the old man in the hallway. The man was pushing a janitor's cart, slowly making his way toward the break room. His uniform was faded, his back slightly hunched, and his silver hair peeked from under a worn-out cap. "Sorry, son," the old man said kindly, stepping aside. Dylan rolled his eyes and continued walking, straightening his tie. Today was his first day at Winston Enterprises, and he wasn't going to let some janitor ruin it. As he walked into the office, his fellow interns, Olivia and Jake, waved him over. "You see that old guy?" Dylan whispered. "Why do they even let him roam around here? He slows everything down." Jake chuckled, but Olivia frowned. "Maybe he's worked here for a long time," she said. Dylan scoffed. Please, if he were important, he wouldn't be pushing a mop. Just then, a sharp voice interrupted. "Dylan Parker?" Dylan turned, flashing his most confident smile. A woman in a sleek navy suit stood in front of him, Rebecca Hayes, the head of human resources. "You're late," she said, her voice clipped. Dylan's stomach dropped. There was traffic," he lied. Rebecca didn't look impressed. "Follow me." As he walked past the old janitor, Dylan smirked. "Maybe clean the floors faster next time." The old man simply gave a knowing smile. If only Dylan knew who he was really talking to. Dylan strutted into the conference room, barely listening as Rebecca Hayes rattled off the company's expectations for interns. He was too busy sizing up his competition. Olivia was scribbling notes, nodding attentively. Jake, on the other hand, looked just as disinterested as Dylan. Rebecca finished explaining the department rotations and turned to the group. "You'll all start on different floors, shadowing senior employees. Learn fast and work hard. The CEO values dedication." Dylan perked up. The CEO, Mr. Winston, was a billionaire and a legend in the industry. Everyone wanted a chance to meet him. "So, when do we actually meet the big boss?" Dylan smirked, Rebecca's lips pressed together. "You won't. The CEO prefers to observe from a distance." Dylan rolled his eyes. "Figures. Another rich guy who sits in his ivory tower." Rebecca ignored the comment and handed out assignments. Dylan was placed in the sales department. As they left the room, Dylan noticed the old janitor scrubbing a stain on the carpet nearby. "Still here, old man?" Dylan muttered, shaking his head. "Bet you've been doing this for decades." The janitor chuckled softly. "Oh, you'd be surprised," Dylan sneered. "Yeah, well, some of us have real jobs to do." He walked off, never noticing the sharp glint of amusement in the old man's eyes. Little did Dylan know, he was digging his own grave. Dylan's first day in the sales department was a disaster. He strutted in, expecting to impress, but the senior salespeople barely noticed him. His assigned mentor, Mark Sanders, was a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair who had been with the company for over 2 decades. "All right, kid," Mark said, handing Dylan a thick folder. "Go through these reports. Understand our client needs before you start shadowing me." Dylan scoffed, flipping through the pages. "Seriously? This is grunt work? I thought I'd be making deals." Mark smirked. "You don't even know what we sell yet, do you?" Dylan rolled his eyes. "I don't need to read a bunch of boring reports to sell. I've got natural talent." Mark sighed but didn't argue. "All right, let's see that talent. Go pitch to that guy." He pointed toward a potential customer, a wealthy businessman in a tailored suit. Dylan straightened his tie and swaggered over. "Hey, sir, let me tell you about the best investment you'll make this year." The man raised an eyebrow. "Go on." Dylan launched into a messy, overconfident pitch, full of buzzwords, but lacking substance. The businessman's face remained unreadable. At the end, the man simply said, "I'll think about it." Then he walked away. Mark shook his head. "That was awful." Dylan frowned. What do you mean? I was confident. Mark leaned in. You didn't listen. You just talked. Sales isn't about throwing words at people. It's about understanding their needs. Dylan crossed his arms. Whatever. I'll get the hang of it. As he turned to leave, he bumped into someone. The old janitor, carrying a mop bucket. The dirty water splashed on Dylan's expensive loafers. What the hell, old man? Dylan snapped. Do you even watch where you're going? The janitor chuckled softly, grabbing a rag. Didn't see you there, son. Let me clean that up. Dylan snatched the rag away. Forget it. Just stay out of my way. He stormed off, while the janitor watched with an amused smile. Dylan had no idea who he had just insulted. Again. Dylan spent the rest of the day making enemies without even realizing it. After his failed pitch, he brushed off Mark's advice and decided he was better off figuring things out alone. Instead of taking notes or observing how experienced employees handled clients, Dylan focused on showing off. At lunch, he strutted into the break room, grabbed a coffee, and leaned against the counter, loudly complaining about how outdated the company's methods were. This place needs fresh ideas, he declared, taking a sip. No offense, but some of you have been here too long. Maybe it's time for a new approach. The room fell silent. Mark, who had just sat down with his sandwich, raised an eyebrow. And what's that new approach, Dylan? Dylan smirked. Less talking, more closing. I guarantee I'll land a big client before the week is over. A few of the senior employees exchanged looks. The only person who didn't seem bothered was the old janitor, who was quietly wiping down a nearby table. He chuckled. Ambition is good, the janitor said casually. But wisdom is better. Dylan scoffed. What do you know about ambition, old man? You've been pushing that mop for decades. A tense silence filled the room. The janitor simply smiled and walked away, his blue work uniform slightly wrinkled, but his posture steady. One of the senior employees, a woman named Lisa, shook her head. You really shouldn't talk to people like that, Dylan. He shrugged. I'm just saying what no one else will. Lisa sighed. All right, let's see how your new approach works out. Dylan was too full of himself to realize that he had just insulted the wrong person. The next morning, Dylan arrived at the office extra early, determined to impress everyone. He had spent the night watching videos on sales techniques, convinced that his aggressive, no-nonsense approach would land him a major client. As soon as the office opened, he spotted a man in an expensive suit walking through the lobby, an obvious high-value client. Without hesitation, Dylan strode over, flashing his most confident smile. Good morning, sir. Looking to make an investment today? The man raised an eyebrow, slightly amused. And you are? Dylan Carter, one of the sharpest minds in this company. He extended his hand. And you are? The man shook his hand, but instead of answering, he glanced around the office. I actually have a scheduled meeting. Dylan ignored that. You don't need a meeting, sir. You need the best deal on the market, he chuckled, leaning in slightly. Honestly, some of the older folks here won't understand what a forward thinker like you needs. But I do. Let's sit down, and I'll make sure you leave here richer than you came in. The entire office had gone quiet. Lisa, Mark, and several senior employees watched in horror. Dylan had no idea that the man standing before him was none other than Jonathan Ellis. The CEO, the quiet old man from the break room. Still smiling, Dylan continued, Trust me, you won't regret doing business with me. I'm nothing like those dinosaurs around here. Jonathan chuckled softly. Is that so? Before Dylan could respond, Mark stepped forward. Mr. Ellis, he said quickly, his voice tight. Shall I take you to the boardroom? Dylan's smug expression faded. Wait, what did he just call him? The client smiled and patted Dylan's shoulder. I appreciate your enthusiasm, Dylan, Jonathan said casually. "Let's see how well that works out for you." Dylan's stomach dropped. He had just spent the last 5 minutes pitching to the owner of the company, while insulting half the staff. And worst of all, Jonathan didn't look angry. He looked amused. And that was terrifying. Dylan stood frozen, his mind racing. Jonathan Ellis, the CEO, the quiet old man he had mocked in the break room, the man he had just pitched to like a fool. The silence in the office was unbearable. Jonathan turned to Mark with a calm smile. "Shall we head to the boardroom?" Mark nodded quickly. "Right this way, sir." As Jonathan followed, he glanced over his shoulder at Dylan. "Oh, and Dylan." Dylan swallowed hard. Yes, sir?" "Make sure you attend the company-wide meeting at noon. There's something important I'd like to discuss." A few of the senior employees exchanged looks. Something was coming. Dylan forced a nervous smile. "Oh, of course, sir." But inside, he was panicking. For the next few hours, Dylan sat at his desk, trying to figure out if Jonathan was going to fire him on the spot. "I'm sure it's fine," he muttered to himself. "Maybe he liked my confidence." Lisa walked by his desk and smirked. "Good luck at the meeting." Her tone sent chills down his spine. The employees gathered in the main conference hall, murmuring amongst themselves. Jonathan Ellis stood at the front, calm and composed. "Thank you all for being here," Jonathan began, his voice steady but commanding. "As you all know, I rarely involve myself in the day-to-day operations of this company. I prefer to observe quietly." Dylan gulped. Jonathan continued. "This morning, I had the privilege of interacting with one of our interns." The room was dead silent. Dylan's palms were sweaty. "He was confident," Jonathan said with a small smile. "Ambitious, determined to prove himself. Qualities I admire in any employee." Dylan exhaled in relief. Maybe he wasn't in trouble after all. Then Jonathan's smile faded. "But confidence without humility," his tone sharpened. "Ambition without respect, that I do not tolerate." Dylan's stomach dropped. "I have seen far too many young professionals enter the workforce believing they are above others. That experience and wisdom are outdated. That kindness is weakness." Dylan sank into his chair. Jonathan looked directly at him. "And I had the unfortunate experience of witnessing exactly that today." Every eye in the room turned to Dylan. His face burned. "I want this to be a lesson for everyone," Jonathan continued. "Titles mean nothing without character, and treating your colleagues with disrespect and arrogance is not how we do things here." Dylan wanted to disappear. Then Jonathan spoke the words he had been dreading. "Dylan Carter." The air in the room stilled. "Stand up." Dylan's legs felt like concrete as he stood up. His heart pounded so hard, he thought the entire room could hear it. Every eye in the conference hall was locked onto him, some filled with curiosity, others with amusement, and a few with pure disappointment. Jonathan Ellis folded his hands behind his back, his piercing gaze never leaving Dylan. "Tell me, Dylan," he said, his voice steady but firm. "How long have you been with the company?" Dylan swallowed hard. 2 weeks, sir," Jonathan nodded. "And in these 2 weeks, have you taken the time to learn about your colleagues? About the people who work alongside you?" Dylan's throat went dry. He could feel the weight of his co-workers' stares, waiting for his answer. I guess I should have," he mumbled. Jonathan let out a deep sigh. "You didn't even bother to learn the name of the man you mocked, the man you dismissed as a useless old man, the man who built this company from the ground up." A ripple of murmur spread across the room. Dylan's face burned with shame. Jonathan's voice cut through the noise. "Respect is not optional, Dylan. It is the foundation of leadership." Dylan felt like his entire career was crumbling before it even began. Jonathan turned to Mark, the senior manager, and nodded. Effective immediately, Dylan Carter's internship is terminated. The words hit Dylan like a truck. Gasps filled the room. Some employees exchanged nervous glances. Others, well, they didn't look surprised. Dylan's eyes widened. Wait, sir, please. I made a mistake, but Jonathan held up a hand, silencing him. I'm not doing this to punish you, Dylan, he said. I'm doing this to teach you. Success is not just about confidence and ambition. It's about humility, respect, and understanding the value of every single person around you. Dylan stood there, speechless. Jonathan stepped forward, his expression softening slightly. You have potential, Dylan. But potential without wisdom is like a ship without a rudder. Learn from this. Dylan felt a lump rise in his throat. He wanted to argue, to beg for another chance. But deep down, he knew Jonathan was right. He had brought this on himself. As Dylan turned to leave, shoulders slumped in defeat, Jonathan's voice rang out one last time. Dylan. He stopped, turning around hesitantly. Jonathan's eyes held a knowing look. Come back in a year. If you've learned your lesson, I might just have a place for you. Dylan's breath hitched. A second chance? He nodded slowly, determination flickering in his eyes. Thank you, sir, he said softly before walking out. As the doors closed behind Dylan, Jonathan turned back to the room. Let this be a reminder to all of you, he said. In this company, and in life, how you treat others matters. A lesson Dylan Carter would never forget.